Hello. One thing that I found interesting from this week's reading was from the McDermid 2010 article, where they talk about the hundreds of studies of different veterans and Holocaust survivors and the effects of PTSD on their spouses. The studies showed that trauma symptoms do reverberate within families. In a similar vein, David Daughtry in the 2013 Wounded Warrior video said a sentiment that I often said to our clients. The experiences that you have had aren't natural, but your responses to them are natural. David Daughtry kind of makes the statement when he's talking about feeling broken and kind of weak in his and how he's handling and dealing with what he's experienced during his service. Yeah, I think these things are interesting to me because I'm just really interested in trauma and the effects of trauma on individuals, on family members of individuals who've experienced trauma, the effects of trauma on people who work with people who've experienced trauma, the idea of collective and historical trauma. All of those things are super interesting to me, and I am pursuing work. I'm hoping to continue to pursue work with refugees, and there's often a lot of trauma involved, so I think it's good to learn more about its effects. So yeah, always really interested in trauma-related discussions. I also found interesting from the Maston 2013 commentary, Competence, Risk, and Resilience in Military Families, the idea of developmental timing. Maston says the same experience can have very different impacts on the individuals involved depending on when in development it happens. That's on page 279. She's specifically talking about separations and reunifications for military families and how that impacts younger versus older children. But it's a good point to consider just across the board. And there's a lot of interesting research that I discovered when I was pregnant about stress in pregnancy and how that can affect the baby in utero and yeah, just kind of all those things that affect development. I think it's super interesting. There was a sentiment echoed throughout like the readings and commentaries and some of the videos this week that kind of coincided with something in my life this week, so I want to focus on that. This week I met up with an old client of mine. It's been almost 2 years since I officially stopped working with my program that I was working with before with unaccompanied refugee minors. I still do some volunteer work and I'm around, but I'm not working full-time anymore as I used to. But anyways, I happened to see an old client of mine, and it's been 2 years since we had seen each other, so we were catching up. And unfortunately, not a lot has changed for him. The situation in Bangkok for refugees is quite dire, and yeah, it's just really hard to be here for them and for him. But and kind of in passing, one of the things that he said to me was how much he misses our program. The program I was working for actually no longer exists due to funding, unfortunately, because there was a huge need. But yeah, he just made kind of an offhand comment about how he misses the program and just the space that it provided, the space to hang out and the space to connect with peers. And kind of this idea of community is kind of woven throughout several of the readings this week. So I want to highlight some of the comments that I thought were really, really great from this week's reading about community. In the Bowen 2003 article on page 42, the authors say, as our results suggest, communities can become important sources of tangible support, information, and expressive support when informal connections exist at multiple levels, are frequent, and are meaningful and purposeful. And the authors also kind of talk about the importance of developing a community culture, which I think is a really interesting idea, especially for those of us who might be interested in creating programs in the future. I think an important question to ask yourself would be, what culture do I want to create in this little sub-community of my program? So That's something that I did not ask necessarily before my last job, but that I think there's a lot of things we didn't do super great, but I think one of the things that we did do well was kind of create a little community. So I would love to be more intentional next time and set out some goals for what that community culture could really be and spend some time feeding into that. Another great quote from the Easterbrooks, Ginsbury, and Lerner 2013 article on commentary on page 108 is, young people may be more resilient when they know others who share the same kinds of stressful experiences and know that they can count on others to understand and lend support. Glenn Elder calls this phenomenon linked lives. I think about this, about my work a lot when I read this. We were very much understaffed, and sometimes there were only like 2 of us working and several hundred children. So we had to foster peer support. We talked about it all the time. How do we get these kids to help each other and build relationship with each other and ultimately treat each other like family in a place where they don't have family. So I think, yes, this phenomenon of linked lives exists. It's important, and it's something also that can be fostered. And so that was really interesting. And then also in the Wounded Warrior 2012 video, several different people who are interviewed talk about the importance of feeling a part of something, of having camaraderie, having a space that they can come together and having time to share and to talk. So I think, yeah, these are all just important quotes about the importance of community and sense of community. I would love to talk more about the role that school and educators play as both protective and risk factors. This is mentioned in both the Mastin 2013 articles. In the Competence, Risk, Resilience commentary, Mastin says, school is a central context for human development in most societies where children at risk for many different reasons can find supportive and competent adults, nutritional and medical assistance, extracurricular opportunities and activities in a context dedicated to fostering human capital. That's on page 280. And in the What We Can Learn from Military Families, Mastin 2013 commentary, she talks about moving and the role that school plays. Mastin says, frequent moves create both challenges and opportunities for families. There is considerable evidence that changing schools and homes can take a toll on learning. And she kind of goes on to talk about how it can take an academic toll, also just losing social supports, a change of scenery, all these things impact a child. And then she kind of mentions some different programs that outline several military-based programs, such as uniform curriculum to foster educational continuity, programs that are more peer-based that help students to acclimate and transition more easily to a new school or a new area. Yeah, I think it's an important question to ask ourselves. What role does a school play in fostering resiliency? And what programs should or could be implemented to further a sense of community, as Bowen 2013 would say. So yeah, how do schools and school programming affect our communities, our culture, our families, and our families' processes? These are all really important and pertinent questions, I think. And then the only question I really have from this week is for those of you who are a part of military families or who are currently working or have worked with military families. The question is, did you find the focus program outlined in the Saltzman 2011 article to be relevant to the issues you deem most difficult for military families? I'm specifically talking about the 5 risk mechanisms in the program, outlined in the program: incomplete understanding, impaired family communication, impaired parenting, impaired family organization, and lack of guided belief systems. Most of these risks were also talked about in the CBS 2012 video by the husband and wife who were interviewed. So So it seemed to me like these were really thoughtful and thorough processes for the program to focus on, but I would be interested to get the perspective of those who actually have more experience with this population than me. So, wow, it was a lot to cover this week, and this is a long video, but those are some of my thoughts, questions, and reactions from this week's reading. Thanks.